Hey folks, Craig Danger, vinyl record player. Oh, back again. This time we're going to be talking about 1967. Is it the best year in music? I think I've got about 10 reasons why that may be the case. So obviously this is something that could shake your very worldview to the core. So obviously in cases like this, I have no choice but to recommend you buckle up. And we're back! So I thought I'd start an audacious new series. We're talking here about why this year, 1967, is the best year in recorded music ever. And you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and start with number one. No more preamble. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. So number one on this, as far as I'm concerned, again, these aren't really necessarily in order, but I mean, in terms of importance, I'm going to almost say that this might be it. Number one would be the release of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Now, obviously, I'm not going to talk a lot about that album. Believe me, if you did a search with people wanting to review that album, there's probably 18 billion videos talking about that album. But gave it a listen today. I mean, again, the thing is with the Beatles is everything is kind of a masterwork. So hard to say. But I would say that Sgt. Pepper's definitely is a distinctive step from the previous album, which of course was Revolver. And also at that, in 67, the Beatles obviously took some acid and that became a bit of a thing. Lots of other albums were released. But I think in terms of revolutionary change in music, nothing really beats Sgt. Pepper's. The Beatles, obviously almost every one of their albums are classic, but I'm going to say that as the number one reason, Sgt. Pepper's. Did it invent psych? I'm not 100% sure that that was the case, but the fact is monumental album that I think really chalks up to be my number one reason why 1967 is the best year in music ever. And I just want to thank everybody for tuning in, for liking and subscribing. You know, every little bit helps, obviously. In the comments, if you could let me know another prime reason why 1967 is the best year in music ever, I would love to know. And obviously, the more discussion we can get, the better as far as I'm concerned. So what is your reason why 1967 is the best year in music ever? Number two, let's talk about debuts. This was a giant year for debuts. Obviously, The Doors released their debut LP, had some chart action with Light My Fire, was a pretty big deal. Obviously, Jimi Hendrix, Are You Experienced? I believe he released 2 albums in 67, which obviously in terms of guitar playing, hard rock, etc., nothing was the same after that. Hendrix came in and kind of blew everyone out of the water. Obviously, Traffic released their first album. The Velvet Underground, of course, at the time, you know, nobody was listening to the Velvet Underground. It was kind of a New York only thing. I believe they had some residencies in Boston, but the fact was, they never really got popular. But as far as being overall influential for years to come, I mean, the Velvet Underground were basically it. Also, obviously, Procol Harum, Whiter Shade of Pale. I believe it is one of the most played singles in the history of Britain, anyway, and certainly is around, I would imagine, the top 20 most played singles in American history as well. Also debuting that year. How about a little bit of Scott Walker? Scott One. Now, this album, of course, mainly known to British residents, as Scott Walker didn't do Butkus in North America, but really excellent album. Would begin one of 4, Scott's 1 through 4. He did do a couple albums after that, but these are kind of seen as his Meisterworks. Obviously, who also? Oh, how about Al Green? Al Green with Backup Train. This isn't actually Backup Train. This is something from Bell Records. I'm not sure if it's an early compilation of singles, but it does include Backup Train. And certainly Al Green, of course, would not really gain much notoriety for some time to come. It wouldn't be until he kind of teamed up with Willie Mitchell at High Studios in the early 70s. I believe one of his first hits would be Tired of Being Alone. But of course, Can't Get Next to You, he did a fantastic cover as well. That album from 71, I think up until then, Al just wasn't really hitting, and again, was kind of finding his identity as a singer. So, number 2, I think we just have to look at the debuts, which are pretty exhaustive. Also, I would add just one so I don't forget. I believe the Bee Gees' first LP was also released in this year. But again, there's many, and in terms of artists that would make a huge, almost forgot one, obviously Big Brother and Holding Company with Janis Joplin, a monster release. In terms of bands that would, of course, affect the rest of the decade and music to come. Really, number 2 reason 1967 is the best ever is those debuts, those silky debuts. Okay, and the number 3 reason why 1967, the best year in music ever, gotta go with Aretha Franklin. Gotta go with the beginning of her Atlantic period, with, of course, Jerry Wexler and Arif Mardin producing. Really, her career had started much earlier, certainly in the gospel realm as early as the 50s, sort of singing as a really young teenager, and from there signed a multi-album contract with Columbia Records. Columbia just didn't know what to do with her. Unfortunately, basically around that time, I think she may have had 1 or 2 top 40 hits in a period of about 5 to 7 years. Until about 66, Atlantic comes in and signs her. Jerry Wexler sort of masterminds it. And what do we come up with? We come up with I Never Loved a Man, The Way That I Love You. Certainly, I would say one of her best albums of the 1960s. Easily top 3. This is fantastic. This would, of course, come at the start of the year, and then towards the end of the year, hugely underrated, same session, but also a fantastic album is Aretha Arrives. Again, this basically, Aretha kind of re-emerging as an actual monster force, I think was a surprise to a lot of people, but I think it's without a doubt that she changed soul music basically forever, more from that point on, and certainly that would not have happened if she would have continued with Columbia. And you could also say if she would have signed with somebody like Brunswick or Mercury, the likelihood of her sort of obtaining that Queen of Soul status probably very low. Such, I believe, was the essence of the power of Wexler, who really understood really how to get the best out of her. And on these 2 albums, of course, fantastic stuff. Number 4, let's talk about The Summer of Love, which 1967 was. Obviously, a lot of hippies, a lot of business going on, but I think most importantly, the first really huge music festivals, which became a real thing for promoting new bands, breaking new bands. Obviously, these festivals often included they included documentary makers capturing footage of the events, which of course would bring those to the broader public. Of course, I'm speaking of the Monterey Pop Festival just a week before, and I'm not tracking the name here. I will put that up. There was actually a music festival a week before Monterey Festival, but the Monterey Pop Festival obviously was giant, was a major event in terms of music at the time. It wasn't just folk. A lot of bands sort of made a name for themselves because of that. I would say Jimi Hendrix certainly was a big monster part of that. But I think we have to go to number 5 in The Summer of Love to talk about, of course, Otis Redding. In 1967 would be a year of incredible highs and sadly, really incredible lows for Otis Redding. Certainly, if you've heard many of the records, I would say that Otis Redding, there has never been another voice like his. And certainly in terms of creativity, Otis Redding did write a lot of his material. What's significant about the Monterey Pop Festival was that basically, before then, he had been playing mostly to black crowds, a lot of Chitlin circuit sort of business. and really had not truly sort of broken through to the white crowds. And what did the Monterey Pop Festival did? Absolutely elevated him to stardom on an incredible level that really he never expected. Having, I believe, the year before toured through Europe with the Stax basically crew, he had begun to see some real success. And I think what's also obviously interesting about it is that around the time of the Monterey Pop Festival, of course, he was writing Sitting by the Dock of the Bay. Why was he writing it? Well, you know what was a monstrous influence on him? Sgt. Pepper's. The chord structures and obviously a lot of the song structures, Otis Redding was looking at them and going, wow, I got to change some things. He did. He wrote Sitting by the Dock of the Bay, obviously his posthumous #1 hit. And wow, what a career it was destined to be until unfortunately December 8th, 1967, when while rushing to a gig in Madison, Wisconsin, unfortunately his plane went down and basically everyone died on the plane except for a single trumpet player, which is wow. What a terrible situation to kind of be in. But that trumpet player actually ended up joining the Bar-Kays and continuing on as a musician. But again, it was a year of incredible highs and incredible lows, unfortunately, for Otis Redding. Really, that leaves, I think, many of us wondering, where would he have gone from here? 1967, obviously, the sixth reason why, obviously always the Rolling Stones. Musically, there was not an incredible amount of fantastic material coming out from them in 1967. Of course, though, there was Flowers that was released, as well as Between the Buttons, which was sort of, I think, more of a compilation of singles and B-sides. But, of course, that year, Keith and Mick were both arrested at the Redlands estate, which was Keith's home in London, and that ended up being a giant thing with a drug bust, etc., etc. So that kind of, I guess, the Stones were still the Stones, but they had kind of solidified themselves as sort of the bad boys of rock and roll. Certainly the targeting of them by, first of all, the News of the World, but also the police. It kind of ended up solidifying their reputation, which I think could only help them in the years to come. So that's number 6. Let's talk about number 7. So for number 7, I think without a doubt, this is one of those things that, I just personally, I think in terms of overall influence in the world of music, I simply have to go with Days of Future Past by the Moody Blues. This would be number 7 as far as 1967 being the best year in music ever. I think it would be stunning if somebody could argue that this is not fairly foundational in terms of prog rock, in terms of symphonic rock, in terms of the way that albums were recorded at the time. The issue, of course, with the Moody Blues was that this album was not one that they could readily perform live. And it was probably a couple of albums into their career before they finally started recording albums that were sort of meant to be played live. And certainly this one, again, total classic, Nights in White Satin, Tuesday Afternoon. But really, the whole album is really like partially concept album, partially, again, sort of the foundation of prog. And this album, along with, you could say, although I'm not sure that I would 100% go there, that Procol Harum's first hit, their debut album, could also be considered that. But again, I think that this one absolutely blows it out of the water in terms of quality. But again, in terms of overall influence, not much beats our friends, the Moody Blues. This, of course, would begin their Magnificent 7 period, where there would be 6 more LPs where they were just cooking with gas pretty much the entire time. There's not really a dud in the bunch. And but Days of Future Past, released in '67, really a monumental classic, hugely influential, I think, really for years to come. Number 8, what can I say except the first issue of Rolling Stone magazine was, of course, released. Now, hey, I mean, nowadays people would be like, magazine? What's a magazine? But the fact is that back in those days, there was not a lot of press in terms of music. In fact, at that point, Rolling Stone might have been the only music-exclusive magazine in North America. Certainly later on, probably much later on, Spin magazine would come to compete with them, and obviously Cream, and there were a number of other magazines. But I think at that time, Rolling Stone really became not only kind of a counterculture magazine, but also was kind of one of the few sort of music-oriented magazines at the time. So to have that first issue released in '67, I think really showed the world that music was not just sort of an accessory and was in fact part of the culture in a hugely and monstrously monumental way, particularly when it comes to the youth culture. So with number 8, I'm going with, of course, what can I say, the first issue of Rolling Stone magazine. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, not the way things used to be anymore, but I believe that's definitely a prime reason why music continued to get better over the next decade. Number 9, I'm going to go with the release of Love, Their Forever Changes LP, which I think is really kind of one of the best sort of 60s sort of almost hippie-like albums of that era. Really genuine classic, and frankly, I wish I had a hard copy of that one. That one, unfortunately, you can still get on. You can get on vinyl all day. Original pressings, they're probably going to run you into the hundreds, but that one has been repressed many a time, and I certainly would say that Love, fantastic band, but it was in fact Forever Changes that was really the true killer. So that is number 9. And for number 10, I'm going to go with the Byrds, Younger Than Yesterday. This album, of course, would be really their last major charting album. Of course, they had monstrous hits with Mr. Tambourine Man and obviously with Turn, Turn, Turn. By that point, oddly, their career was sort of on a downturn. And in '67, they would release Younger Than Yesterday, which again, I think is one of their best, at least Byrds Mark I albums. And certainly their songwriting had strengthened quite a bit by then. And of course, what would happen in '68, they would release Sweethearts of the Rodeo, completely change their sound, kind of be very foundational in terms of country rock. But the fact is that in essence, Younger Than Yesterday, really a classic album, and really kind of the end of that initial period of the Byrds, pre-Graham Parsons, and of course before they kind of split into two factions, that being the Byrds, and of course the Flying Burrito Brothers. So, woo! That was a lot of information to digest, friends, but I'm going to go with this as being my 10 reasons why 1967 was the best year in music ever. So yeah, that's the way we're going to go with this one. Like, subscribe. Again, thanks for sticking around to the end. And yeah, I'm just going to see you on the next one.